Morry, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And you're in the business of comedy. As a train goes past,
That'd be the Chicago train, would it be, near the studios of NBC?
exactly.
Yeah.
You've called it right. Now, Morry, you're in the business of comedy. What does that mean exactly?
Yes, it means you're loved and hated simultaneously. You give people work, but you don't give me work. Why don't you give me work? So I make a lot of friends, and then people get angry because for whatever reason they don't get picked for a particular thing. But yes, in the long run, all ships rise with the tide, or the tide lifts all ships. That's what I'm trying to do in comedy. I'm trying to improve the professionalism and the industry as a whole across, in particular, stand-up comedy.
So I mean that's a big answer. It's broad, but if we nail down the specifics, you're running comedy festival shows.
Yeah.
You run a school.
Yes.
Of how to teach people the next generation to become comics. Coach, yeah. So we're here.
You cut it out.
Yeah, cut that out. Yeah. So you run it. So
that was an audience member.
That's an audience member. Yeah. So you're running some comedy festival shows. You also coach people in how to become comedians.
Yep, that's right.
And then also you have an app, a Gig Me app, which helps people find gigs, get paid. Also helps promoters book.
Yeah,
comedians as well. Plus helps audiences find comedy. But we'll get to all that. Let's go first to Comedy Festival. What's happening in Comedy Festival?
Yeah, well, the Comedy Festival for me is a marketing tool for two of the things that you mentioned: the comedy school and the app. So I produce I produce 3 separate shows during the Comedy Festival, but I also run 3 venues, and those 3 venues use the app, for example, Gig Me, in order to, we have probably in one show, one of the venues, we have over 14, 15 different shows performing and multiple times. So yeah, the Melbourne Comedy Festival, which I've done for the last 8 years, has always been sort of an outlet and a conduit to the business that I do.
So now there has been Comedy Festival drama in the past where some of the big international acts kind of steal the limelight, and then the people who, and this is not a criticism, this is just what some people talk about, but the whole idea that the people who make comedy run 9 to 5, 365 days a year are often kind of the small feeders in the Comedy Festival, big international British and Americans.
Yeah.
And even like the big ABC stock, Hugheses or Will Andersons, that they kind of, Peter Helliers, they kind of, they're the only ones making money. Is there any truth to that, or can anyone have a good comedy festival?
Well, actually, I don't think those particular names you mentioned do that well in the Comedy Festival because they choose not to do a lot of shows, and they're such a big name for the other 11 months of the year that they can take a break, actually.
Oh, of course.
And I know a lot of good pro comedians actually head north during the Melbourne Comedy Festival because no comedians are in the north, that being Sydney, Brisbane, and elsewhere. So they can actually get more work elsewhere during the Comedy Festival. But I understand what you're saying. You're absolutely right. The Comedy Festival, is great in that it gives everyone an opportunity. But what it has done over the last 33, 36 years, whatever it may be, has trained Melburnians and trained people who do come to the Melbourne Comedy Festival from outside of Melbourne that comedy runs for 23 days of the year. Full stop. And so, like you said, for the other roughly 11 months of the year, they don't consider going to a comedy show. They don't consider supporting comedy. And so it's immediately after the Melbourne Comedy Festival ends, which is typically the end of April, most of May is dead for comedians, particularly those who reside in Melbourne. They really have to get out of Melbourne and head to a different comedy venue, maybe go to Sydney for the Sydney Comedy Festival there. But if they're stuck in Melbourne for whatever reason, it is dead. So I've always been, and I've tried a number of times to sort of look at developing that 11-month window.
Yeah,
which is
it's very needed, isn't it?
I think we need government support. We need the Victorian government. We need the Melbourne City Council or similar city councils nearby the CBD of Melbourne to get involved. And maybe someone needs to build a tabernacle of comedy, somewhere that there's a dedicated comedy venue that can take the metaphorical and potentially physical torch of comedy from Susan Provan, the boss of Melbourne Comedy Festival, and ignite that for the next 11 months.
Now, another thing about comedy, Morry, you would have noticed as well, is that you tend to have, like football, like tennis, like any other profession, like music business, you tend to have this top of echelon of people who break through and go and have illustrious careers at the ABC or maybe radio or whatever, and they seem to kind of what would you say? They kind of reuse the same faces often.
Yeah.
Like once you've got a track record, it becomes easier. Now, what do you say to people who are kind of like, look, you're not going to become a multimillionaire out of comedy, and in Australia, because the comedy scene being what it is, you're going to kind of make maybe a living, maybe. But when it comes to buying a new car or buying a house, or it's going to be like there has to be a love affair with comedy, right? I mean, or do you go, look, you've got a 1 in 1,000 chance, take the big swing. What's your advice to these guys?
Yeah, I think you're right. There was a window pre sort of YouTube and so on, probably the 90s, which you discussed. Not sure in this cut, but in the previous cut, you mentioned that you started comedy in the 90s. It's a different world. Like, for example, Jim Jeffries, one of the most successful Australian comedians of all time, has had his own TV show in the US, tours. No one had heard of him in Melbourne because he's a Sydney comedian that went to the UK. I think Birmingham, probably obviously did London as well. And he found his voice, as they say, or he's developed his skill sets overseas. Same with Ronnie Chang, for example. Ronnie did very well at Raw Comedy, didn't win it, but did very well. Was involved, I think he wrote a script for the international student, got some ABC funding, very good actor, got picked up, and the next thing you know, he's on, again, the US TV. But if you're just here in Melbourne, or Australia as a whole, it is tough because there's no Hey Saturday anymore. There's no
Tonight Live with Steve
Iza. That's right. I mean, a lot of comedians, they relied on that 5-minute spot.
We'll be right back after this commercial break.
Yeah, Rove McManus gave a lot of voice to comedians, and fortunately that's gone. So, but YouTube's back, and YouTube came around, right? And people like Lewis Spears, for example. Again, if you don't know him, that's fine because the great thing about the internet is you can be very niche. And Lewis Spears has millions of followers around the world, but he's been very good with his targeting of Australian, particularly Victoria and then Greater Australia, and he does tours that sell out, and he makes money from that.
So what you would say to people, in a sense, is you'd say, look, there is a tribe for you. You just have to find them. Now, it might not be the traditional route of radio, TV.
Yeah.
It might be TikTok, YouTube, the new media style. But you'd be saying to people, find your own path, basically, in a sense.
Yeah.
Find your own path.
Yeah, like absolutely. Like Ruben Solo, another Melburnian who is very wacky in his comedy, a bit like yourself, interactive with the audience, uses a lot of sound, but he's built such a great following now that he can go on the road and do tours. And probably that's the important thing for the viewers out there. It's O2O, online to offline. So you can build up your Instagram following, your TikTok following and so on. And you might have 1 million people there, but if you can't convert that into an offline audience, and by offline I mean that these are people who buy tickets. That was beer coming out there. That are buying tickets. Then you're not going to make money in comedy.
Yeah. So buying tickets is a big one. Now let's talk a little bit. Let's segue a little bit. You've got the School of
Nothing. We have the Hard Not Knocks Comedy School.
Okay.
Nice trick.
Now there has been copyright infringement over the name a couple of
Oh, it was
times.
worse than copyright infringement.
Oh, sorry, trademark.
It was trademark.
It was trademark.
I went to
infringement.
federal court twice.
Federal court twice
Yeah.
to argue around the name because someone else was using a similar name in a different field. And not nothing to do with laughing.
No.
But it is laughable in a way. now, you coach people along with Brad, who's a coach.
Brad Oakes, yeah.
Brad Oakes. You're coaching the next generation of comics. Talk us through that. I mean, tell us the whole thing, because obviously, if you've got a dream about becoming a stand-up comic, you don't have to navigate that dream on your own. You can go to Morry's
Hard Knock Knocks Comedy School.
Hard Knock Knocks Comedy School.
It's on my shirt.
Yeah, it's on your shirt. Hard Knock Knocks Comedy School, and you can learn and be thrown in with about 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 other people, and you can all kind of jump up together as newbies and have a surf. You know, have a go.
Yeah.
Talk us through the school. How's it work? I mean, you know, it's a 5-day school, right?
It is 5 days. Although you've done it before, and you have a great joke where if a joke doesn't land, you will say to the audience, you know, it should have been 6 days.
Yeah, the school should have.
And everyone laughs at that. That's great. No, it is only 5 days. And I'm the facilitator. So my background is formal training. I've worked in training and development for 25 years, and prior to comedy, that's what I did. I built a business in training and development. So I've come to the world of performance from a corporate sense. You know, there's 3 types of people who do our course: the keynote speakers, and that's where I came from, the bucket list tickers, and the comedians of the future. And so the keynote speaking role, you know, being able to perform, make eye contact, use volume, tone, speed, and pauses, exactly like that. These are all skill sets that cross over between stand-up and keynote speaking.
So what you're saying in a sense is, you could be a corporate guy who has to give presentations at work from time to time, go do Morry's course to work out how to liven them up and inject a bit of humour and get a bit more confidence about it.
Yeah, absolutely, and terrify the HR department.
Terrify the HR department.
But yes, but probably more so external audiences. So there's an entire market called keynote speaking out there, and interesting on that note, a comedian might earn, you know, a good comedian, like a headline comedian, might earn between $3,000 to $5,000 for a gig, big gig, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty good money though. A keynote speaker can make easy $10,000 to $20,000 to $30,000 because they've got a skill set outside of comedy. They might have climbed the Himalayas. They might have survived domestic abuse. They might have built a business and be a household name. You add humour to that. You're adding sort of a multiple to your content.
And you've seen people of that ilk come into the school and get taught basically. Okay, so basically what you'd call the guidelines or the rails of how to kind of what a gag is. I mean, that's what you teach people, right? What a gag is.
What a gag is,
but what a gag is not.
But also the performance of what a gag is. And so, you know, there are some people that come in off the street, you know, the Cheryls and the Bruces, and the Cheryls come in and they're like, I'm really funny after a bottle of Chardonnay in front of the girls. And, I told this funny story about me at the gym, at the Pilates. I should be a stand-up comedian. No, Cheryl, you should not. That joke only works when you've got all your girls in the room and they understand the context of that joke. Same with Bruce. Bruce, you know, turning the meat patties and the tonging the snags. Your jokes that are, you know, quite offensive to anyone outside your immediate social group won't work to an audience that doesn't know who you are. And so what we often have to do is break these people, metaphorically, and get them away from telling the truth or telling off the cuff. You know, I don't write it down, it just comes to me. Yeah, that's the problem, Bruce. You know, that's why you've got a restraining order. So that can take a little bit of time. And likewise, the keynote speakers, the people who are up there saying, well, in my third book that I wrote on climbing the Himalayas, that's also a problem because it's not interesting. And it's, get to the funny faster is a mantra that what we preach.
Yeah, and Tim Smith said to us years ago, Fred and I, when we were studying comedy, Tim Smith said, you want to find a convenient route to the gag, not necessarily the fastest way, but you want to know that this leads to the gag, and it's economical.
Yeah,
economical. Yeah. Now, it's interesting because we talked before about the whole idea that. What makes my group laugh at the pub, like on Friday night, you go with the boys, and what makes them laugh, the cheeky comment you might make, is not actually going to work on stage. So we introduced this concept in the Hard Knock Knocks school that comedy it's kind of like its own art form in a way.
Yeah,
that's right, isn't it?
I strongly believe it's an art form. In fact, that is part of the problem with stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
In the eyes of the government in Victoria and the government in Australia. They'll put millions of dollars into Sturt Street here in Victoria and Melbourne, which has opera, it has ballet orchestra, it has classic theatres, but they won't put a little small room in there for stand-up comedy.
We'll be right back after this commercial break.
I remember the last few weeks of the Rubber Chicken, you were having this great nights upstairs.
Yep.
You were having great trivia downstairs. You were having great music night. I mean, it was really heartbreaking to see the Rubber Chicken close. The Rubber Chicken was a comedy venue, music venue, trivia venue. You could have a drink. The food was amazing.
Yep.
My wife and I would go. Tell us the story.
Yeah, so look, we took a bit of a punt. Victoria, unlike other states in Australia, had 2 blocks of lockdowns. So I came back from overseas. I was actually over in China, funny enough, didn't cause it, but I was in Beijing during COVID. I was there for business. And my family and I came back and I decided, COVID's over now, we've been told. Let's invest everything, my life savings, into a pub, and that will become the basis and the epicenter of the comedy business that I want to create. I've already got a comedy school. I've got plans for an app called Gig Me, which hadn't been built at that point. And this would be the hub. This would be the office. And we ran it for 2.5 years. And we certainly learnt a lot in that process, but we got a lot of great support. We had 3 rooms named after comedians. The Elliot Goblet room, obviously Jack Levi, Elliot Goblet. We had the Jeff Green room called The Green Room, which is a classic double play on the Green Room reference of a studio, and Jeff Green, his surname. And then we had upstairs the Bradford Oaks room as well, or the Bradford Oaks bar. And so, it was every single day there was a comedian, a headliner performing. We ran 5 nights a week in terms of comedy. So we had 2 nights. That was a Sunday and a Wednesday was open mic, and that was the free comedy, and that was for anyone who wanted to get up and try. And it was always hosted by a professional comedian. We had Bradford Oaks and David Tolk as MCs for those 2 nights. And then the other 3, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, was paid upstairs. And like you said, with the tryouts, is we would look at the green room performers, and we would get 1 or 2 of them and put them upstairs in the Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Anyway, everything was going well. Unfortunately, in Victoria, possibly the rest of Australia, there isn't a lot of protection for commercial tenants. So commercial landlords have a lot more power than residential landlords do. A residential landlord can't kick you out in 14 days. A commercial landlord can. So if you owe, it's a 1956 law or something, hasn't been revised, and I don't think there was any plague in between 1956 and COVID. And so we had debt, just like every other venue, venue or shop down in South Melbourne or anywhere in Victoria, and we were paying it back. But unfortunately, and this is my opinion, the landlords got greedy. They saw an opportunity to cut our 8-year lease we're at 2.5 years at the time, cut that and bring in a new tenant who was willing to pay more per month because COVID was well and truly over at that point. And they locked us out, 15 days notice, turned their phones off, turned their email or didn't respond to their emails. VCAT had a line out the door, bigger than the MCG audience. So there was nothing we could do. And they literally snuck in, changed the locks on us, and that was the end of the Rubber Chicken, unfortunately. And I just, having been sued twice in the federal court in that year and the year before, I just didn't have any more money to throw at lawyers and real estate agents. So
it's interesting.
That was it.
We've asked Morry to sponsor the ARWIN KRAZE show. he's basically saying he's broke. But anyway, we'll get to the other conversation another day. Now, the Rubber Chicken was a special venue. Okay, now if for those of you who don't know the comedy scene in Melbourne, you've got plenty of pubs and bars with comedy rooms, kind of like partitioned on, tacked on the side. You've got the Comics Lounge, which is dedicated comedy, and then you had the Rubber Chicken as pretty much the only.
There's Comedy Republic, which is in Burford.
Actually, Comedy Republic, yeah, and the Comedy Republic is a room I've never been to. And it's kind of like potentially a pro room, it's not potentially welcoming to, necessarily to
straight white men in their middle age. That's what you wanted to say. Yeah, no, it's definitely on the left.
Carl Chandler, is that right? He runs that?
No. I think he would definitely not be running it. He's Carl Chandler is the definition of a straight white middle-aged man. No, he runs Morris House, the basement underneath Basement Comedy. But it's run by Reese Nicholson and his partner, I believe, or maybe his partner more so, and probably a team.
Yeah.
I wish them all well, and I think every comedy scene does need niches, and I think they appeal very much to a certain niche. And that niche is very big in Australia. The gay community in particular is huge, so good on them. We were appealing more to so again, the Comics Lounge, fantastic venue, holds 400 people.
Yeah.
You don't go to the Comics Lounge to catch up with your mate over a beer.
Yeah.
It's not intimate. And so the Comics Lounge is great, does very good in the big shows. When I opened the Rubber Chicken, rebranded an old pub and turned it into the Rubber Chicken, it was all about intimate comedy. It was, an audience of 110 max. There was live music as well as comedy. So you could go there, watch a show, and then enjoy food and wine in watching a band or just having it in the background. It was a different experience.
Can I say, I had an infamous musical gig at the Rubber Chicken where I couldn't tune my guitar. And it was open mic. Anyway, nightmares. And also, who was that character, Tolstoy character I played was also done at the Rubber Chicken. So
right. Yeah. It's funny you say that because George Capaniaris, who's a very famous stand-up comedian and actor, he played... What did he play?
Yeah, I did the school that he taught.
Very good. So he got up on stage. So there was live music. There was open mic music on, and he jumped up on stage and played. He's a great guitarist and not a bad singer too.
Yeah, fantastic.
So there's a bit of crossover between comedy and music. So yeah.
Well, Morry, we're going to wrap the show up. We've hit the 40-minute mark. It's been great coming on.
It's getting hot in here too.
It's getting hot in here. We're going to go and put the aircon on. I want to thank you for coming on the show again. You've been a great guest. I want you to come back again, give us further updates, talk about how Gig Me's going, everything else. Maybe there might be a new Rubber Chicken on the somewhere down the track. Sure. Maybe even a Le Joke somewhere. You never know. You never know. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Morry Morgan. You've been listening to the ARWIN KRAZE show. We'll see you next time.